Good afternoon, everyone. So in the previous video, we have discussed about local and static na variables. So another variable scope that we will discuss is the global na scope. So a variable will have a global scope if it is declared outside of all the functions. So it is global in a sense that it is accessible to every other function in your program. Okay, so um, it is defined outside of a function and usually on top of the programs. And then they also hold their values throughout the lifetime of your program, right? And they can be accessed inside any of the functions defined for the program. So for example, if you have 5 functions in your program and then you have declared a variable I, for example, uh, on top of your program, then that variable na I will be accessible in the 5 other functions that you have defined. So it's available for use throughout your entire program after its declaration. So what does it mean? So in the previous video that we have discussed, in the local or automatic na variables, right? So if a certain function has, if a certain function is called and the local variables inside it will be created, okay, and after the function is done with its execution, all its local variables will be destroyed, okay. So that does not happen in your global variables. So in global variables um, are not destroyed and will be available for use throughout the entire program. Okay, so here's an example of a global variable. As you can see, we have a function main, and on top of the function outside of main, we are declaring integer variable g, which is global. Okay, so if you add another function here, so that g will still be accessible to that function that you have newly defined. Okay, so well, in a global and local variables, global and local scope, you can have the same name. Okay, so but the value of the local variable inside the function will take preference. So for example, we have a global variable g, which is equal to 20, and it's declared outside the main program or outside any function. And we also have a main function and which has a local variable g initialized with a value of 10. So when we print out the value of g, um, instead of printing 20, since the local variable will take preference, this will print out a value of 10. Okay, so another example. So we have 2 functions, main and also display, and we have a global variable n, which is equal to 5. So the n in the main function, it increments the n. So since the n is global, it is accessible to main, right? So and then after it increments, n will now be equal to 6, and then calls the display na function. So the display function also has access to the global na variable n. So the previously incremented na n is already 6. So after calling display and also another incrementing, so it will now be equal to 7, right? That's why it prints out 7. Okay, so as you can see, you don't have to redeclare this integer na n inside your main and display because it is already declared outside. Okay, and therefore still accessible in your other functions. Okay, so it is convenient when many functions must share a variable or when a few functions share a large number of variables. Okay, so for example, you have a variable pi, and then that pi is is used by several na functions. Okay, so and it's, let's say its value is not changing, right? So it can be you can declare it as a global non-variable. And however, in most cases, it's better for functions to communicate through parameters rather than by sharing parameters. So what it means is that you have a function which has, let's say, a parameter sum, and after com after that sum can also be passed to another function. Okay? So it's not declared as global, but rather pinapasa-pasa nyo yung sum in different na functions. Okay? So, well, why is that the case? Why is it better for functions to communicate through parameters rather than by sharing parameters? Because um, if a certain global na variable is changed during maintenance, we'll have to check every other function is in the same file to see how the change affects it. All right. So and then if there's one case wherein you assign a global na variable with an incorrect na value, so it may be difficult to identify the guilty na function. So where did it go wrong? So mahihirapan ka mag-debug ng code mo. And then functions that rely on global na variables are hard to reuse in other na programs. So what it means is that, for example, in one program, you define one function and you created another program that could potentially use that function that you have defined in your other program. So one example is the sorting method, let's say. So that sort na method, it can be used in different na problems, right? So, but if your sorting method is not self-contained, it relies on other global na variables, you have to, yung mga global na variables na ginagamit mo sa method na yan, kailangan mo pa i-hunt yan kung saan mo sila kinuha. And you have to copy all those also. And in order to make it work in another na program or file. Okay? So, also, here's an example of the dangers of using a global na variable. So let's say we have two functions, print one row and print all rows. So the purpose of print all rows is to print a 10 by 10 na asterisk. Okay? So you have the first na loop which prints 10 na rows, 10 na rows, and then it calls for each na iteration, it calls the print one row, which prints a 10 asterisk. Okay, so this is what you have to notice. We have declared it declared a variable I, a global variable I, which is used in print one row as well as in print all rows. Okay, so now let's say the print all rows started running. So, and inside nested in the loop is the print one row na call. Okay, so we are expecting that it will display a 10 by 10 arrangement of asterisk. However, the print all rows prints only one row. Why is that the case when we are expecting 10 by 10? Kasi 10 times siya dapat mag-iterate, di ba? So, kasi when we call the print one row here, the I, which is a global na variable, the last na iteration, in the last na iteration, I will be equal to 11, right? So since it is global, that 11 na variable, that 11 na value will be stored in I, and therefore will be accessed in here, accessed also by the void print all rows. So in its condition, the 11 is less than is greater than 10. So this will not no longer execute. Okay, so because the condition is already false. So the for statement in print all rows then increments the I and tests whether it's less than or equal to 10. And it's not, because it's already 11. So the loop terminates and the function returns. So these are just one of the examples of using global variables, and its bad results. Okay.